She's the Eternal who is legally distinct from the Greek god of wisdom. We're talking about Thena. Hi, my name is Nando. In this video, I take a character from Marvel Comics, talk about their history, their power set, their personality, and give you some reading recommendations. And that is all because this week, this character is being introduced into the collectible card game, Marvel Snap. So if you're just interested in the character, that's the first 80% of the video. The last 20% is the Marvel Snap stuff. All right, let's talk about Thena. Thena is one of the Eternals. So we're doing a lot of Eternals in a row here. We've already covered Gilgamesh for this season. Thena is a more significant Eternal than Gilgamesh. Still, I would say not the most high profile Eternal. I would say we're going to cover the two of those that show up in this season later. Although I would say Icarus, perhaps the most high profile of the Eternals, is not in this season of Marvel Snap for some reason. Doesn't really matter, just can't stop bringing that up. So Thena, like the rest of the Eternals, was created 1 million years ago when the Celestials, big giant space super life creating god things, came to Earth and made 3 different things. They made the Deviants. The Deviants are little monster guys that live underground and breed frequently, so there's lots of them, but they don't have very many superpowers. They made people who are just like people, normal, and then they took 100 people and gave them superpowers and made them the Eternals, but they can't have kids. So it's kind of like that one horse-sized duck versus 100 duck-sized horses. Like, which one would win in a fight? The Eternals are the horse-sized duck, the Deviants are the duck-sized horses. And the Eternals are these ageless super beings. They all have different superpowers that they develop over the course of their, potentially infinite lives. They can die, but they're brought back to life by either themselves just willing it or a machine that resurrects them. So as long as they have access to one of those methods, it is pretty hard to kill an Eternal. And the Eternals have a leader called the Prime Eternal. This is something that, they could vote on and pick a new Prime Eternal, but for most of the run of the comics, it's a character named Zuras, and he has a daughter named Azura, and she is an Eternal who is good at fighting and smart and all around good Eternal. But the Eternals run into a problem. They're named similarly to Greek and Roman and Sumerian and all kinds of other gods and witches and wizards and deities and stuff like that. And those gods do exist in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So like Zeus exists. Zuras also exists. They both kind of look the same. So eventually Zeus has to go like, hey Zuras, what's going on here? And Zuras is like, this is just a weird misunderstanding coincidence kind of thing. But here's what we'll do. We, the Eternals, will represent you on Earth. So I will be like the Zeus of Earth. And that way you guys don't have to deal with them. We'll take care of all that. The Olympian gods are like, sick. That sounds great. We didn't want to do anything with these losers. And as a show of good faith, Azura, Zuras' daughter, changes her name to Thena, and she takes the place of Athena. So I've always wondered, and it's never brought up in the movies, so like I don't think the movies explain it particularly well, but no one seems to talk about it either in the Eternals or the gods, like whenever we meet either of them. Apparently in the comics they did talk about it. They made a deal where it was like, you guys represent us. However, after that deal was made, the Eternals started getting really popular and people started thinking they just were the gods. So we're like, oh, Makari, yeah, that's the god of speed right over there. And the Olympian gods were like, well, actually, no, that's a different guy. He's up here. And they got in a big fight. So it didn't work out, but that was the idea. And that's why this character's name changed from Azura to Thena. Now, with Thena, I think it's fair to say that she has one of the most interesting arcs in all of the Eternals lore. Because aside from those monster guys I was talking about before, the Deviants, usually the Eternals and the Deviants just would not hang out. There would be no intertwining between those groups. And the idea that there would be a romantic entanglement between those groups is completely unheard of. But Thena didn't care. So she started dating one of the highest profile Deviants, a character named Crow, who is in the movie, played by an actor who I thought was supposed to be Dan Stevens, but I guess it's Bill Skarsgård or something. It doesn't matter because we'll never see him again. He's just a bunch of tentacles and stuff. In the comics, he looks more like a guy. But that character, Crow, and Athena started dating, and it became a whole thing. Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers. And part of it is that Athena just sees the Deviants differently. Like, she's like, nah, they're normal, whatever, I don't care. And good for her, seems like she's into Crow. Crow is like a bad guy sometimes, so frequently they will be on opposite sides of a big war, and then maybe Crow will have a change of heart, they'll get back together, but then the relationship will break up. So they're a relatively unstable couple, but it's at least something that comes up a lot in the beginning of Thena's comic history. One of what must be the craziest things about this character is that she has had 2 children with non-Eternals, because Eternals together cannot have kids. It's their like big weakness, but they can have kids with people, with Deviants, aliens, whatever, just not Eternals. And Thena has done this twice. So first, her and Crow had twins. Now, she did not actually give birth to the twins. What I think happened was the embryo was implanted into a human woman who had the kids and raised them. So these two kids are raised. They're named Donald and Deborah, and they have normal lives until they turn 18. And Thena's like, hey, you're part eternal. We don't really know what your deal is because we've never had a kid from part eternal, part deviant, but you are that. So like people probably gonna be after you, but you also might have superpowers. Figure that out. What it turned out these superpowers were is they could fuse together into one big creature with a bunch of arms. So like Mecha Shiva, the fusing of the two kids into one big kid. And when they were in this form, they were called Tzaboth, Tzaboth. I believe this is a Hebrew deity, like that name is shared, but they were not, I don't think they thought that. I think they were just like, that's what we're calling ourselves now. Later, the kids would also use their superpowers to turn into the same person, but instead then they turned into a character called the Dark Angel. And I found this referenced in articles, and it makes complete sense. That version didn't have multiple arms. It was just kind of a guy, and it was part of the idea was like, oh, they have a lot of darkness in them and light. And again, the Eternals are very simplified versions of characters. It's like you would never write that comic book today, and there's a lot of stuff about the Eternals comics that don't work. But some of the ideas are just so wild that they created another fusion person called the Dark Angel. Apparently, the writer who wrote Heroes for Hire did not know that years earlier, they had already done a Fuse the Kids Together story, but fused it into a completely different thing, this Tzaboth character. So when they made Dark Angel up, they just happened to do the same thing. That's why, like, there's no continuity between these two things. They don't look the same. They're not like the obvious next step of their powers. Two different writers just thought, it'd be cool if those kids could like smush together into one kid and get superpowers. And they never talked about it. And that's why it was so weird back in the day, because you didn't have Google. You couldn't just Google like Eternals kids superpowers and figure out what those were. So sometimes writers would just have to guess or just assume like, well, no one's done this, and someone had done that. That's the first pair of kids. They're the weird ones. We've never seen them since. Fast forward to the 2000s era of the Eternals. Sprite makes all the Eternals forget who they are because Sprite is unhappy with the fact that they are, a child forever. Get that? So during that time, different Eternals do different things. Thena gets a job working for Tony Stark. Crossover, synergy with Brand, very good. And also has another child with a human man this time. So does not know she's an Eternal, just has a kid, and then that's it. When she becomes Thena again, when she's woken up and like thrown back into the Eternal stuff, Thena's like, I like this kid. I'd like to keep the kid. He's like a child. He's not like grown up already. So like someone's got to take care of this kid. And Zuras, her dad, is like, absolutely not. We're not doing it. He shouldn't even be here. Shouldn't even exist, but whatever. You got him. So I think we're gonna have to kill him. And Thena's like, well, you're not killing him. And Zuras is like, fine, but I'll babysit him. Zuras loves this kid because he's like a grandpa. He's, oh, this is fun. I like having a kid. Turns out the kid's a spy. The evil robot monsters from the other part of space or something are using the kid to spy on all of the Eternals' knowledge. So when he gets the grand tour of the Eternals headquarters, he just goes into the computer room and starts downloading all the information. Everyone's like, what the heck? And then Cersei's like, oh, he's a spy. And then the kid just dies. He'll just like go blah, and then done. And Thena is like really upset about this, understandably. She's like a little bit upset at Zuras. I'm assuming he explains it to her and then she's cool. It does make a humongous difference because by the end of this book, he's fine. Kid gets brought back to life by the Dreaming Celestial, but it's just a really bizarre like storyline. There are no other that I can remember Eternals having kid stories in the comics. If there are, they're not really that important. So it's wild that the two times it has happened, it's been Thena. She had two kids that turned into big old monsters, but they were good guy monsters, but still they were weird monsters. Then one other kid who is an alien spy and then was brought back to life and is cool. It's just like, you don't see that a lot. Especially because in comics, they love to continue stories by like, if the Eternals were really popular, there's no way that there wouldn't be stories where it's like, oh, Thena and Icarus managed to have a kid and it's this kid Eternal that's gonna, carry on the legacy and also get children that are reading the comics interested in the Eternals. It's like, oh, he's just like me, but they never did that with the Eternals. Like partially it's probably because in the books they say they're not able to, and partially just they didn't really think they were going to be able to get all the kids to love Eternals. Like it wasn't worth it. Speaking of Zuras and Eternal Prime, at one point the Eternals revealed themselves to the world and Thena took over as Eternal Prime It didn't last very long, but that was something that she did that was pretty cool. Most recent thing that happened with Thena in the Karen Gillan run, like Gilgamesh, she was another character who was suspected of killing Zuras. For her, they thought, oh, she's working with the Deviants, or she's upset with this law that they can't marry and intermingle, so maybe that's why she did it. It didn't end up being her, but that was how she got involved in the story. And in that book, she had a relationship with a deviant called Tole, which I would say you want to read about that. It's an interesting little bunch of things that happens with him. Issues 3 and 8 of those books are the ones where they really get into Thena's story there. So I'm just talking about Eternal she's close to and stuff. Each Eternal gets a superpower. They all have all of the superpowers when they start. They're born with like flight, invincibility, mind reading, telekinesis, like the ability to transmute objects, laser beams, whatever. And as they grow older, they pick certain specialties and then become really good at those. And it's like stats. They min-max different stats. So like Gilgamesh maxed out on strength and he didn't, fly or anything like that, but he was just the strongest one. Thena is that, but warrior. She's the best warrior. She's one of the best fighters. She killed Gilgamesh in a fight, which is tough. And like she took some hits from him. But like in the movie, they actually characterize this pretty well. There's like the 5 Eternals who are like the fighters and the 5 Eternals who are the thinkers. She is one of the fighters. And she is debatably like, I don't know if this has ever been really put to the test. Like some of the other Eternals that are on the level with other Marvel characters, they've gone like, okay, who's stronger, Gilgamesh or Hercules? I don't think we've ever seen whether Thena is like one of the best fighters in the Marvel universe. I think it'd be tricky to judge because there's so many characters that are this, right? I don't know if she's a better fighter than Shang-Chi. I don't know if she's a better fighter than Wolverine. I don't know if she's a better fighter than whatever the Iron Fist currently is. Like I would say, hypothetically, she probably is. But I cannot think of a time when that's ever been confirmed. We'll talk about a version of that in a couple weeks where in the comics they just actually figured out who was the best at one thing and an Eternal was involved. But yeah, in the movie, Thena is played by Angelina Jolie, which continues to blow my mind that she was in a Marvel movie. It's interesting because this version of Thena doesn't really share very much with the version of Thena from the comics, partially because there is no Zuras in these Eternals. Their highest level Eternal is Ajak. So we don't get to see her dad and there to be a relationship with those characters. She doesn't have any kids, partially because she doesn't seem to have a like long-term romantic relationship. Her and Gilgamesh live together. He might be her caretaker. Maybe they're together, but it's pretty unclear. And then he dies. Crow is a bad guy. They don't seem to know him. He just shows up in this story. He takes over Gilgamesh's powers and uses the fact that he has like Gilgamesh's mind inside of him to try to trick Thena. And for a second, you're like, oh, is this what they're going to do? This is the relationship, but that doesn't go anywhere either. In the movie, the most interesting thing about Thena is that she has the Eternals. It's called the Mod Weary. It's a weird word. I'll spell it here. It's spelled on screen right now. You can see how silly that is. But basically, because she has lived so long, starts to just kind of lose it. Like your brain breaks down. They have to reset her. And that's why she's not the best fighter in the MCU, is because she can't be completely counted on to not just turn around and start stabbing her allies. But that's, I'd say, where they kind of leave that character off in the movies, if we ever see him again, which it seems like Kevin Feige really wants to do more Eternal stuff. And the rest of the people at Disney, like the bosses, just don't. I personally would like to see more because I think there's something there. But I do think it would be a tough sell for people. So I think there would need to be something about it. We would either have to have a big cultural turning point. We'd all have to go, you know what? No, Eternals was great. Or they would have to kind of rebrand it as like Eternals v Thor or something. Then like I could see that working. But besides that, I don't know how they bring back the Eternals, which was one of their more high profile flops at the time. Now it's not so bad. That released this year would probably be like the highest grossing movie so far. So, things change. In Marvel Snap, Thena is a 2-cost 1 power with a card text after each turn, plus 3 power if you played exactly 2 cards. So this is interesting. I cannot figure out why the card reads this way. Like, I don't see this being related to her in any way. Like, she's a good warrior, so she should be a card that is hypothetically strong, dangerous. She works with the other Eternals, I guess. I mean, if anything, she works better with like Deviants, with characters that are perceived to be enemies, but I don't think you could do a card like that where like, well, I guess you could, right? If your opponent plays a card here, your card gets +1 power or something like that. That's an option, but I don't think that's like how you would define this character. Because it's 2, part of me is like, is this because she had twins And like Thena loves it when there's twins to be had. So if 2 cards get played that are like the twins of the cards, then she gets extra power. I can't imagine that's what it is, but like that'd be pretty interesting. As far as functionality, I mean, she's in a bounce deck, right? So she's gonna work well with a lot of other warrior characters. Angela, Elsa Bloodstone, right? Kitty Pryde, Beast, Bishop. I mean, those characters all work really well together. And I think she's going to be a good addition to a bounce deck, probably. It's interesting, right? Because she's a +3 in Snap. Traditionally, +3s are really good when you get to add 3 power for an effect. Because if you do that 3 or 4 times, she's a 214. And like adding 2 cards to the field is not that big of an ask for what you're getting. But I don't think she works particularly well with any of the Eternals. Like Fastos, she does it. I guess she works okay with Gilgamesh. So earlier in the game, she'd be powered up when Gilgamesh is put on the board. Because she's powered up, he gets more powerful. So that's something. But I don't see Fastos, Cersei. I don't know. We'll talk about Arishem when Arishem comes up. But like, I don't think there's too much synergy with Bakari or any of the other Eternals that are being introduced in Marvel Snap. Thena doesn't have too many other really significant relationships with other characters. I will say the Heroes for Hire arc, where we deal with her kids one of those times, is back when Cersei and the Black Knight, Dane Whitman, were on a team together. But I don't think she's going to work that well with Dane Whitman, so can't imagine they'll be, really good friends. Honestly, if she was a redhead, which she's not, I would be like, oh, that's why they gave her this powers, because redheads have but she wouldn't have a fill up the spot power like Elsa Bloodstone or Angela or Jean Grey. She would have a play X amount of cards. I wonder if there's something where like a certain group of characters, like maybe it's blonde women, maybe it's women with swords, maybe it's characters in gold, whatever, if they want you to play a certain amount of cards at a certain time. I don't know. We've never seen another card like that as far as I can tell. So yeah, I don't really know. I think as far as a card, it'll be okay. I might get it. We'll see. I think there's some other cards coming out this season that seem like they're potentially going to be very interesting. But I do think there's a space for Thena to work in Marvel Snap right now. I'm curious to see if that plays out. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to do all the other characters. These videos go up early on Nebula, a week early before they hit YouTube. They are on Nebula, so if you want to get a heads up on all your friends, so when people are like, hey, who is this Thena, you already know, then you should definitely go to Nebula. And if you do use my code, TheNandoCut, when you do go to Nebula. The other thing is, if I ever do decide to do like an extra thing, like pick an extra character and make a video just about them, I'll probably base it on who people comment they want to learn the most about. And like I've seen people say like, do Infinite. There's really not that much to Infinite. He's a guy that shows up from another galaxy and he's really big, and they have to convince him not to show up and crush everybody, and then he does. But there's other characters that I think are a little bit more esoteric, that have a lot going on and come up enough in Snap that it's like maybe people do want to know about, like Angela or something like that. So if you have those characters, put them in the comments. Let me know who it is. And yeah, you'll see me next time. Goodbye.